When they talk about waging a war on carbon, you need to remember we're carbon-based life forms. They're talking about us, where they said that animals and agriculture were destroying the planet, and so we needed to move toward eating bugs. You know, the Bible is very clear. Eating bugs is an abomination, actually, is what it says in the Bible.
Yeah, I've eaten a cricket once. It was Cajun flavored, though. It wasn't that good. When we look at the Dutch farmers in the Netherlands protesting, what do you think it is that they're protesting? Are they protesting that the environmental regulations, or does it go a lot deeper than that?
It goes much deeper than that. They're protesting an effort to destroy their farms, to destroy their livelihoods. Many of these farms have been in their families for hundreds of years, right? Holland is an ancient nation, and many of these farms have been passed down from generation to generation. You know, great grandpa started the farm, in the 1600s, and just kept passing it along through the generations. And now suddenly the government wakes up and says, well, we got to comply with EU and UN decrees and regulations and agreements. So we're going to have to shut you guys down. And they've been actually remarkably transparent about the fact that they intend to shut down farms. They're actually calling already for the expropriation of certain farms. They're calling for using taxpayer money to take farms from farmers. With these nitrogen regulations, ammonia regulations, emissions regulations, they're going to bankrupt a huge swath of Dutch agriculture. And that, of course, is the plan. What's interesting about Holland is that the politicians have at least been a little bit more honest about what they're doing. Most of the efforts to destroy farmers that are happening around the world in coordinated fashion through UN, World Economic Forum, and these regional governments that they're building like the EU. The politicians haven't outright come out and said, yeah, we're going to shut down farms. We're going to destroy farmers. We're going to expropriate lands. In most cases, it's just a regulation. We're just trying to preserve the environment. But in Holland, we really saw what the end game was, and that is to shut down, especially small family farms, right? Some of the big corporate, giant mechanized industrial farms, those will probably be allowed to survive, at least for a while longer. But in Holland, they actually have this crazy plan where they really want to get rid of agriculture and turn the entire nation of Holland and even into Belgium and parts of France and Germany and Luxembourg into this giant metropolis that would be connected by super fast trains and stuff. And some of the politicians have said, they've actually put this down on paper, that, well, we got to have more space to build houses because we're bringing in all these people from Africa, the Middle East and stuff. We need places to put them. And so we can't have all these people taking up the space with cows and tulips. We need space to build this affordable housing for all these immigrants that we're bringing in here. So what's happening in Holland, I think, is Holland is kind of the canary in the coal mine, right? After the United States, it's the second largest exporter of agricultural products by value. Even though it's such a tiny nation, they export a huge amount of meat, dairy, cheese, tulips. So the value of their agricultural exports is enormous. And of course, Dutch farmers are, if not the most productive in the world, certainly up there, right? Along with American farmers and South African farmers, the Boers. They're trying to destroy them. And again, what's happening in Holland is happening in other places. It's just Holland is kind of the tip of the iceberg where you really see where this is going if we don't get control of it.
You mentioned that, the Holland politicians are being open about it, and a lot of others aren't. I kind of feel like they actually are putting the information out there. It's just we're all in denial about it. Like you could read this stuff, and I can't tell you. I've actually sent documents to people, and they thought, the World Economic Forum was a fake website because they couldn't believe that somebody would actually think that. But could you talk real quick about the Vancouver? See, what was it? The Vancouver Accord, or the
Vancouver Declaration. Yeah. So the United Nations has been on this sustainability mission for about 50 years now. There's hundreds of different definitions for sustainability. But early on, while they were trying to define what it is, they decided they wanted it, but they didn't quite have a definition for it. So they started having these meetings. And in the 1970s, they actually met in Vancouver, the Habitat 1 conference under the guidance of the UN Environment Program and others. And they put out the Vancouver Declaration. And It was one of the earliest documents on this concept of sustainability. And what they said in there in very, very plain English, it's not one of those things where you have to read between the lines. They said that private land ownership is an instrument of wealth accumulation. Therefore, it contributes to social injustice. And therefore, they said, public control of land use is indispensable, was the word they used. In other words, it is absolutely essential that the government end up controlling land rather than private individuals, private farms, private owners. And of course, that's not a new concept. We saw the Soviet Union try to implement that. We're watching China implement that right now, right? They're going around and they're wiping entire villages off the map and herding these poor peasants that have been on the land for hundreds of years. They're herding them into these mega cities that they're building. So we've seen what collective ownership of land does. It produces famine. Produces rapid land degradation, right? I mean, this is just very simple economics. And the tragedy of the commons, if everybody owns something, the resource gets depleted very, very rapidly because everybody just sucks out as much value as they can, as quickly as they can, knowing that other people will suck it out if you don't do it. So this is a recipe for disaster. And yet the UN says this is going to help us save the environment. It's also, again, quite ironic because we can see the effects of this around the world. If you want to see the countries with the best environment, the cleanest environment, you look at the countries with the strongest private property rights, the most economic freedom. And I go through this with my economic students, right? The United States, Switzerland, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, these are some of the nations with the cleanest environment, right? These are nations where the rivers are clean, the lakes are clean, the oceans are clean, the land is not totally degraded. Then you go to the nations that have collective ownership of land, collective ownership of the means of production, thinking the former Soviet Union, right? The Stan countries, Uzbekistan. Some of these nations are totally ruined. You go to China, there are days where you can't even go out of your house because the air pollution is so thick and so nasty. So if these people were really interested in preserving the environment, they'd say, well, hey, we need to really strongly protect private property rights. We need to make sure that these people have economic freedom. Instead, we see just the opposite. So I think that would lead any sensible person to conclude that this is not about protecting the environment. This is not about ensuring clean air and clean water and good soil. This is a very different agenda. And I think it's clear it's nefarious.
With the UN's agenda and what they're trying to accomplish, you've got hundreds of millions of years worth of science that proves how our ecosystem works, right? We're a carbon ecology. This is how it works. And this is how it should be functioning. Yet their policies they're only focused on one thing, and that's CO2. A lot of people think that I'm a climate change denier because I hear this narrative out there, and I think it's bogus. I mean, you'd have to be you can't convince me, at least, that everything in climate science, which is extremely complicated, evolves around just carbon alone. But if their goal is to get that system back to working, the things we've learned with regenerative agriculture and putting animals on the ground and having them do the work that they've done for hundreds of millions of years, it seems sensible that would be a direction to go, but yet they're wanting to remove animals.
Yeah, I think there are several reasons for this, but I want to stop on the CO2 thing. I think that is so transparently a fraudulent hypothesis. It's a pretext to control everything that I'm amazed that this narrative has gotten this far. I've been following the UN climate change summits around the world. I've been going to them since I graduated from college, and I've interviewed dozens of the world's top scientists, including many who've worked for the United Nations. And what I've come to believe is that CO2 is not only not pollution, not only not causing the catastrophic global warming that they claim. CO2 is incredibly important. It's the gas of life. I interviewed Trump's climate advisor, Dr. Will Happer. He's a physics professor at Princeton University. And he said, the planet is starving for more CO2 right now. That's why so many farmers pump CO2 into their greenhouses, because what happens, the optimal level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for plant growth is several times higher than it is right now. So right now, the planet is actually starving for more CO2. Plants are starving for more CO2. And these maniacs are acting like CO2 is a toxic pollution. Of course, we exhale CO2, about 2 pounds of it every single day. There's nothing that you can do that doesn't produce CO2, including dying, incidentally. And so from a scientific perspective, the idea that CO2 is dangerous or that it's pollution is simply preposterous. It's ludicrous. ludicrous. But from a totalitarian perspective, if you want to control everything and everyone, if you want to regulate and tax everything and everyone, all you got to do is tell them that the gas of life, the gas that they exhale, is a dangerous, toxic pollution that needs to be regulated and controlled. And I think that's what's going on here. Again, I encourage people to do some research into the science here. I've been looking at it for a very, very long time. And almost everything that they argue is a fraud, right? The global warming alarmists, they use these computer models and say, well, the computer model says that this is what's going to happen. Well, your computer model is obviously wrong. The computer model doesn't even model accurately what happened in the past. If you can't correctly model what happened in the past with your computer model, you ought to throw it out. It's total garbage, right? Obviously, it doesn't offer a reasonable explanation for what's going on with the climate. So no, I'm convinced that this war on CO2 is really a war on humanity. They talk about carbon being this evil, dirty chemical. We are carbon-based life forms, okay? Carbon is not an evil, dirty chemical. When they talk about waging a war on carbon, you need to remember we're carbon-based life forms. They're talking about us. And so we are not pollution. Our activities are not pollution. But it really is a perfect pretext to bring people under control. And, when you look at the ultimate agenda that they have, they want to really transform the world economy. They want to move it away from a free market system with private property and land ownership toward a technocratic model, kind of like a hybrid of fascism and communism, where a technocratic elite makes the decisions rather than the voters, the politicians, whatever it is. You see that demonizing CO2 then becomes a perfect tool because you can give everybody a carbon budget. And once you exceed your carbon budget, then you can't do anything more. And so they want to get rid of animals. They want us eating bugs. That's not my opinion. They've said so many times. In fact, I first reported on the UN's agenda to have us eating bugs back in 2013. A lot of people are just finding this out now, but the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in 2013 put out a very significant document where they said that animals and agriculture were destroying the planet. And so we needed to move toward eating bugs. They talk about how Western populations, the Bible is very clear. Eating bugs is an abomination, actually, is what it says in the Bible. So there's been a long history, at least in the West, what used to be known as Christendom, of being repulsed by the idea of eating bugs. So they said, we need a propaganda campaign. We need governments to wage a propaganda campaign to convince people that they should be eating bugs. And they've been doing that. Turn on PBS, turn on NPR. I mean, even Fox News is peddling this garbage now. You got the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in Canada, the government propaganda service. You got the BBC in the UK peddling this garbage all over the world. And right now, as we speak, they're building the largest insect protein facility in the world in Decatur, Illinois. They know that we don't want to eat bugs, but they also know that they're waging war on the food supply. And when your kids are hungry, well, a cricket bar might sound better than starvation. And so that's why they're moving ahead with this. They're building a big one up in Canada. They're building them in Europe right now. And, this is not going to come all at once. I don't want people to get the impression that tomorrow they're going to come and round up all your cattle. But that's their end objective. And they've told us this. This is not me saying it. This is what they're saying.
What they're actually doing, too, is they're creating patented food products. So it's not something where you could just go out and do it on your own. I mean, you could eat a cricket. I've eaten a cricket once. It was Cajun flavored, though. It wasn't that good. But I mean, they're creating food products that are, based on synthetics and other things that are just unnatural. And then they're trying to force. There was something I read a couple of years ago. It was talking about the largest kind of upheaval in the agricultural industry, and they were saying within the next 10 years, the entire meat industry was going to go bankrupt, and this is the way people were going to be going. And judging from Beyond Meat stock and some of those other companies, I don't think that's actually happening without the force of hand in there. But that you mentioned the technocrats. I was reading an article on Bloomberg just the other day about Bill Gates, and he was doing an interview talking about how he, it almost sounded, the way he was talking, it almost sounded like the anti-inflation bill or the Inflation Reduction Bill was written by him and pushed through Congress. And he was talking about how he interacted with all these different individuals to get the bill passed. But who voted him in office to do that? And I mean, how much of this $750 billion is going to end up in a Gates Foundation?
Yeah, a lot of it will. And there's, I think, $370 billion worth of climate and energy handouts in there. And you see very clearly what happened in the markets, right? As they were considering this bill, huge amounts of capital started flowing into these green companies and green energy and green this and that and the other. This is really, really dangerous. They are trying to centralize control, right? When you have and anybody can go buy a piece of land and get some cows, get some chickens or whatever. That becomes very difficult to control that. But when you have companies that are creating frankenfoods in a laboratory, that is something that you can centralize and control. We're seeing the same thing with energy, right? They want to bankrupt all of our traditional energy sources, companies, or coal, oil, et cetera, and move us all toward these industries and sectors that they completely control. And you can tell very, very clearly that this is not about actually stopping global warming or saving the environment. To look at energy specifically, I was in Paris when the UN came up with the UN Paris Agreement, and I watched all this happen. I read these documents, and so you have the Obama administration at the time was in charge, and they said, well, we are going to cut our CO2 emissions by, I forget what it was. I think it was like 33% within the next 5 or 10 years or something. And then from there, we're going to do even more. And by 2030, we're going to cut, I think it was 50% or something. And so he came back and he started implementing that through the regulatory apparatus, through the EPA, and they just got smacked down by the Supreme Court, thankfully, but started implementing this by executive fiat. Well, the Communist Chinese, who already incidentally emit drastically more CO2 than Americans, and we're on a downward trajectory because we've been switching more to natural gas. Just, the natural order of things is causing CO2 emissions in America to fall, which, by the way, I don't think that's necessarily good or bad. I think more CO2 would be good for the planet. But, if the natural cycle of things results in less CO2 coming from the American economy, so be it. But you look at China, their CO2 emissions are on a rapid upward trajectory. It's very, very obvious. And the Chinese came to the table in Paris and they said, oh, yeah, well, we're going to keep increasing our CO2 emissions until maybe 2030. And then we'll think about maybe peaking them. That was 15 years from when the Paris Agreement was being negotiated. And now stop and think about this for a minute. What's happening when the Obama administration is imposing these regulations, causing energy prices to skyrocket, as he put it? What's going to happen? It's not that people are suddenly going to stop needing the goods and services that we needed before. What happens is you shut down American industry, you shut down American factories because electricity is so expensive, labor is so expensive. You got to deal with the IRS and the EPA and the OSHA and all these things. And what happens? It's not that Americans suddenly stop needing these products. It's not that people around the world stop needing these products. What happens, though, is the factories get shut down in the United States because they can't compete anymore. They get moved over to China. Well, what is China doing? They're building coal-fired power plants faster than we can count them. And they promised that they were going to keep doing that. So if you really believe in stopping CO2 emissions, it'd be much better for those products, those goods and services to be made in America. Instead, they deliberately shut down our productive capacity, shipped it over to China where they know the CO2 emissions are going to be drastically higher per unit of output. So if these people really believed CO2 was bad, they'd be doing exactly the opposite of what they're doing. It tells you for sure that that's not the agenda. And it's the same thing with animal agriculture. It's the same thing in all these sectors. They come up with an excuse to get to their end goal, and the excuse is just sold to the public as if that were the reason. But of course, it's not.
If we give up our independent food sovereignty, and by that, I'm not talking about food security. Food security is having access to food, which right now we're in times where that's becoming more difficult. Some of it's natural. And if you've studied climate over the years and you see how natural cycles work, it seems to me like there's a lot of these regulations being pushed real hard at a time when naturally it becomes more difficult for us to reach the yields that we would normally reach. I mean, you almost saw a complete shutdown of fertilizer over the past year. And some of it was scarcity. Some of it is, phosphorus going towards batteries for EV vehicles and everything else. And then part of that too was what was it, Union Pacific, to meet an ESG score, cutting down on how much of it they were willing to ship across the country. When you give up all of your food security or food sovereignty, your right to choose where your food is coming from, or if we lose that, I feel like we lose the ultimate liberty of living. We lose the one thing that you would never fathom somebody could take from us.
And that's the goal. And, we have documents showing that they've understood this for a long time. Back in the early 1970s, Henry Kissinger, the guy who's constantly blabbering about the need for a new world order, he was former Secretary of State, former National Security Advisor. So when he was National Security Advisor, I think it was in 1972 or 3, he put out this document where he argued that there are way too many people on the planet, and we've got to find a way to reduce the number of people on the planet. He actually argued that this was a national security imperative. And one of the mechanisms that he outlined, and anybody can go see this, the memo has been declassified now for decades. It's a National Security Memo 200 or maybe 2000. I forget which one, but you can find it out there. It's been floating around for decades. And they talk about using food as a weapon. They talk about using food exports and imports as leverage to force these governments into curtailing the population, either through promoting abortion or promoting birth controls or promoting forced sterilization. And so we know that they have been considering for generations, the idea of using food, centralized control over food, as a weapon to get the population to do what they want it to do, or to get governments to do what they want it to do. And so that's the real danger, is that once food production and food distribution becomes centralized, suddenly you become dependent, right? There's not a lot of things you won't agree to if your kids are hungry. And I think that's really the ultimate objective. They want to get it so where they control the food, they control the energy, and then they can tell you, well, hey, if you want to access food, you've got to do X, Y, Z, or you've got to sign over on the dotted line your private property rights, or you've got to send your kids to such and such institution. So it's, it seems like the danger's far off, but I think it is a threat. It's becoming more and more of a threat with every day that passes. And I think it's going to become much more obvious in the years ahead to everybody.
And really, in September of 2021, the UN Food System Summit really kind of put an emphasis on the leverage on leveraging the power of the food system. And I believe they even said everyone everywhere must take action and work together to transform the world, the way the world produces, consumes, and thinks about food. I mean, their goal is by 2030 to meet these 17 goals or whatever it is of the 2030 agenda, and we're looking at language in there of literally leveraging the food system to accomplish their agenda.
Yep, that's exactly right. And, energy is the same way. I think that's why they want to get control of energy. And think about electric cars, too. Right now, you can go to any gas station anywhere that's owned by a family, typically, and you fill up your car and, hey, you're good. Right. What happens once they switch us over to all electric vehicles? And they're already talking about we're going to shut down production of internal combustion engines. Well, what happens? Well, you've already exceeded your carbon budget. Sorry, you can't charge your car this week. So no trips for you. Right. And at that point, they're talking about building a national grid of charging stations. Right. So instead of going to a small, independent, family run gas station to fill up your car and have freedom to drive wherever you want to, now the federal government will be deciding, well, you've already taken more energy than you're authorized to from the grid. And so, you're not going to be able to do that. So all of this is moving us toward more and more centralized control. It's a very, very real danger. It applies in food. It applies in energy. And notice these are all the sectors that are absolutely critical to life itself.
So what do people do if they disagree with this? What do people do to stop the centralization? Because I feel like consumers and individuals, we all have an opportunity to do something about it.
Yeah, I think there's several things that are essential. As consumers, we have a lot of power. And so I tell everybody, if you're not happy with this, stop participating in it. Don't do your shopping at Walmart. Don't do your shopping at these mega corporations that are woke and that are trying to centralize and control and bankrupt, and that are partnered with the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and so on. Go to your small local producers. Go to a farmer's market. Meet your local farmers. See if you can come up with some kind of deal. Buy a quarter of a cow from your local rancher. Get these systems in place now Also, in your investing habits, right? Be very careful about where you're investing your money. There's a lot of funds out there that are going to take that money and weaponize it against you, against freedom. They're going to try to coerce. I mean, BlackRock is the ultimate example of this, right? They've got $10 trillion worth of assets under management. Many of our states have their money there. I mean, just the conservative states, I think, have $500 billion worth of taxpayer money and public pension funds parked with BlackRock. Why are we letting them manage our money? Because they're using that money, and then they're telling these companies, hey, if you want investment, you're going to have to do the ESG thing. You're going to have to stop using this type of electricity. You're going to have to be more woke. You're going to have to include all kinds of propaganda in your commercials, et cetera. So stop investing your money with these people. And also, I mean, I think we really, a lot of people don't want to get involved in the political process, but I think at this point we have to, just as a self-defense mechanism, right? Right now, there are evil people who are working in the political system to destroy you, to take away your freedom, to bankrupt your business. And so just from a purely defensive position, you have got to get involved. Think of the government as a giant bazooka, right? And it's just there for grabs right now. We live in supposedly a free, self-governing country. There's this giant bazooka. If the good guys have control of the bazooka, then great. You know, we can use it to stop bad guys from coming to hurt us. If the bad guys get control of the bazooka and start aiming at us and pointing it at us, we're in trouble. So we have got to get involved in politics. I know that's not something people want to hear, and not everybody's cut out to run for office. I'm not saying everyone listening to this needs to go out and run for city commission or county council or Congress or whatever. But if you can't run, get involved in helping somebody else to run. Find somebody who you know is a good person, who's going to stand for the rule of law, who's going to stand for the Constitution, who's not going to be attacking small farmers and ranchers, and support them. Go knock doors for them, contribute to their campaign, make phone calls. Go stand outside a polling booth and hand out voter guides, right? I'm in Florida. We'll be doing that on Tuesday. We have our primary day. And so a lot of great people around here, including a lot of farmers. We've got voter guides. We're going to go hand them out to voters as they go in, and make sure, obviously, we have election integrity, because if they rig the vote, then, all the voter guides in the world, all the activism and campaign contributions in the world aren't going to help. So these are all things that are important. And finally, I tell people also, praying would be a really good idea, especially right now, because I don't want to sound alarmist, but we're on the verge of some very troubling times in America. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So now would be a really good time to be requesting divine intervention and getting involved, right? You've got to get involved. So those are some ideas.
Yeah. And I also think, with a lot of what you were just saying, when you're talking about good guys versus bad guys, I wanted to clarify. I think one of the things that we can do as people is have open conversations with those who have opposing views, because I feel like the alienation of people in society over the last few years has been very deliberate. If we can get people to just hate each other and not talk to each other, then we've completely divided the nation, the people. And the more I talk to people, especially when it comes to agricultural food production, a lot of people, for different reasons, from all sides of the fence, they want to see the growth of small farms. They want to see, localized economies. They don't want to see these massive centralized economies. So I don't even think, when you get down to the nitty gritties of that stuff, it's necessarily a conservative or a liberal viewpoint when it comes to that. But we've polarized everybody to the point where they just assume each other are enemies. They can't find a common ground with each other. And to me, that's almost just as dangerous and helping with these agendas as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. There is an agenda to divide the American people along every conceivable fault line. So you see the race mongering, right? The effort to try to get everybody hyper conscious about race, and that race is oppressing you, this race is oppressive. You see this along every kind of line, right? Women are being oppressed by men, and all these different fault lines are fine. Liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. And they get these people into these bubbles where they can't hear what the other side is saying, because you can't even listen to them, because they're the enemy. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, right? If the American people were to unite and say, no, we're going to be free, we're going to stay free, and we're not going to let you destroy our country, we're not going to let you take down our food supply, we're not going to let you crush our small farmers and ranchers and our neighbors, there's nothing they could do about it. There's absolutely nothing they could do about it. But if they can keep us divided, if they can keep us thinking that it's your liberal neighbor who's the enemy, it's the Democrat across the street, or the Republican across the street who's the real problem, we'll stay fighting amongst each other, amongst ourselves, while they run off with all of our money money, and then circle back to come and destroy us. So.